How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Boylai Hobby Time. This display case is usually way too much $99, but I found it on sale for $19.99 because of a large crack on the mirror, which is supposed to give you more viewing angles for your special football. Luckily for me, I don't have a special football. Fortunately, the glass box was still perfectly intact, and I just needed to remove the sticker from it, which started well, but then went how almost all of my sticker removal experiences go, which is toward despondency. Luckily, I was able to use a nice sharp blade to remove the sticker, and once all the residue was gone, I wiped off all the dust, and I set the glass top aside till the end of the build. Next, it was time to pop that broken mirror out of the frame, which I was able to do successfully. And by successfully, I mean I was able to remove it without slicing up my fingers. Once that had been removed and I set it to the side, I pulled out all the remaining tacks using some needle nose pliers. Although the mirror was broken, it hadn't quite run out of usefulness. I was able to use it as a template for the new base, which I made out of a piece of acrylic. After tracing out the lines, I took the acrylic over to my bandsaw off camera and I cut it perfectly. For some reason it didn't fit the first time, so I took it off camera once again and I cut it even more perfectly the second time. The inspiration for this week's build was that I wanted a good display for an SHFiguarts Return of the Jedi Luke Skywalker, and luckily I had an extra Darth Vader lying around. These two are going to be dueling in that iconic scene from the Return of the Jedi. This is the third SHFiguarts model of mine, and I'm always impressed by the level of detail and the many points of articulation that they have. They also come with some additional head and hand options, which is nice. The lightsaber that came with this guy is also very nice and detailed, but when I dropped it, it grew, so do watch out for that if you ever purchase this. I put the lightsaber back in Luke's hands and I posed him on one side of the diorama, and then I drew some scribbles that were supposed to tell me something about the layout of the diorama, which I disregarded. Originally, I was going to cut each floor tile individually, but that seemed like a disaster waiting to happen. Instead, I cut a piece of 040 styrene perfectly to fit the shape of the acrylic, and I marked out and scribed the panel lines on the floor with this cool scribing tool from Tamiya. I bought this tool a while ago, and it's super handy for this specific purpose, but I often forget that I have it. After scoring the flooring, it was time to make some stairs. I cut up some thick styrene beams to make the stringers and some less thick styrene beams to make the steps. I held everything together with my hands as the plastic cement dried, which made this a far more tedious process than it needed to be. In the end, I actually didn't like the way that these first steps looked, so I ended up cutting up some even less thick styrene for the final rendition of the steps, which I made into little frames to hold some plastic canvas. I debated with myself about the proper orientation of these steps and ended up choosing the back right corner. I then cut up some more styrene and I built a little frame for a landing to sit behind the stairs. After gluing the landing to the stairs, I glued the both of them down to the base, and then I glued one final piece of plastic canvas to fill that space on the landing. After drilling some holes and bending some styrene to make some handrails, the structure of the base was done and ready to be painted. I took it outside and used a combo of gray and black, followed by a layer of polyurethane to achieve the look that I was going for. I used a hairdryer to make sure that dried quickly and evenly, and then I set that aside and it was time to work on Darth Vader. This is now the 4th Bondi Darth Vader model kit, and the 20th figure model from Bondi that I've unboxed and put together on this channel, so I'm just going to fly through this real quick. Once the figure was fully unboxed and fully unscrewed, I snapped all the pieces together. Darth Vader's suit changes ever so slightly between each of the movies, and I'm not sure if the model kits from Bondi reflect those same changes. I didn't have a Return of the Jedi specific kit for this build, so I went with the Empire Strikes Back edition, which is what I had on hand. If that level of inaccuracy is offensive to you, I do apologize. Please leave a comment below and I'll leave a like as consolation. Once Darth Vader was fully assembled, it was time to start working on some glowing lightsabers. For the exoskeleton of these lightsabers, I'm using these little cocktail straws. Without them, the flexible LED noodles that supply the nice even glow across the whole blade wouldn't stand up straight. I soldered a thin brass rod, to one end of the filament, I clipped off all of the excess and the sharp bits, and then I ran them together until the filament was fully inside the straw. I then clipped off the excess of the straw, and I began making the hilt out of little pieces of tubing that I got from K&S Precision Metals. I tested the length of the new hilt against the hilt that came with the figure. In case you're wondering why I couldn't just reuse the plastic hilt, it's because it's too narrow to hold the filament. If I drilled a hole large enough, it would definitely break it. I covered the metal tubing with some heat shrink tubing, and then I detailed and painted the hilt. I also painted a few details on Vader himself, and then off camera, I made Luke's green lightsaber in the same way. Through this whole process, I'm constantly checking the circuit to make sure that nothing went wrong. There's a lot of tedious work involved, and it's always a bummer if you have to go back and redo stuff. After the lightsabers were done, it was time to add a switch to the frame. I drilled a hole, but the spot where the switch was supposed to be was a little too thick, so I used a router bit on my Dremel, and I carved that out. Once the space was large enough for the switch, I put that in place. After that, I wiped the sawdust off my workstation, and it was time to wrap up this bad boy. I added a battery housing to the underside of the acrylic, and I connected my wiring from the housing to the switch. I then blocked out the positioning of the figures on the platform, and I drilled a hole for the wires next to each of their back feet. I thought it was going to be a lot more difficult to run the wires from Luke's lightsaber to the base without drilling holes and causing damage to the figure, because he's so skinny. Luckily, I was able to wrap and run the wires in and around and through the clothing in a way that was very unnoticeable, and once the figures were in place, I carefully painted the red wires black, which basically made them disappear. From the back viewing angle, you can still see a small wire running down Luke's leg, but otherwise, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. The last thing to do was to connect the lightsabers to the circuit and bring back that nice sticker-free glass cover that we worked on at the beginning. I carefully put that in place, and after that, I called it good. That is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Huge shout out as always to my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time.